Let's start with Mary, Queen of Scots, who spent 19 years in prison, all because her cousin Elizabeth I was feeling a little threatened. Mary became Queen of Scotland when she was literally 6 days old. 6 days! Most babies can barely see at that age, and she's already running a country. These successful kids are getting younger and younger. Growing up, Mary made some questionable life choices, like marrying her cousin, weird, then possibly murdering him, then marrying the guy who helped her murder the first husband. Eventually, she flees to England thinking cousin Elizabeth will save her. Instead, Liz locks her up for 19 years. What a loving family. The year is 1587, and Elizabeth finally decides Mary has to go. But here's where things get spicy. They hire what can only be described as the world's most incompetent executioner. Picture this. Mary walks to the execution block wearing crimson, the color of martyrdom. She kneels down, says her prayers, and the executioner raises his axe. And he completely misses her neck and whacks the back of her head instead. Strike 2. He gets closer this time, but still doesn't fully decapitate her. At this point it's less execution and more like aggressive carpentry. Finally, on the third try he finishes the job. But the story gets weirder. The executioner holds up Mary's head to show the crowd, and it falls right out of his hands. Turns out, Mary was wearing a wig, and all that's left is bald, gray-haired head rolling around on the ground like a bowling ball. But wait, there is more. A small dog had been hiding under Mary's skirts this entire time and refused to leave her body. Even her dog had more loyalty than my ex. But before we get to the craziest deaths, try hitting that like button on the first try. Proof you've got better aim than a medieval executioner. And if you thought dumb skill issues were rare, meet Queen Caroline of Ansbach, wife of George II, and proof that being royal doesn't protect you from absolutely terrible healthcare. Despite being small, Caroline was actually one of the smartest queens of her era. She spoke multiple languages, debated philosophy, and basically ran England while her husband was busy playing with toy soldiers. But in 1737, Caroline developed what we would now call a hernia. No big deal today. You would get laparoscopic surgery and be home binge-watching Netflix by the weekend. But in 1737, well, let's just say medical technology was slightly behind. Her doctors cut her open while she was fully conscious and removed part of her bowel. No anesthesia, no nothing, just pure suffering. Caroline endured days of excruciating pain that would make any torture laughable in comparison. She probably could have lived with the hernia, but no, the medical experts decided that major surgery without pain management was the move. But hey, her death was so traumatic that it finally changed medical practices. And doctors were like, you know, maybe we should figure out anesthesia before we start cutting people open. Revolutionary, I know. And if you want to hear more about absurd and deadly ancient medicine, check out this video. Trust me, that stuff is crazy. Time to travel back to 613 AD, when political disagreements were settled with significantly more violence and significantly less Twitter. Meet Brunhilde, Queen of the Franks. She ruled for 40 years, survived multiple assassination attempts, outlived 3 husbands, and navigated more political intrigue than House of Cards. Basically, she was the ultimate medieval boss babe. But her rival, King Lothar II, had been holding a grudge longer than Taylor Swift holds grudges against her exes, and after decades of conflict, he finally captured 70-year-old Brunhilde. Now, you might think, okay, she's 70, she's been captured, maybe they'll just exile her or put her in prison, right? Oh, sweet summer child, this is medieval Europe we're talking about. Clothar decided that regular execution was too mainstream. Instead, he chose equine dismemberment, which sounds fancy until you realize it means they tied her to the tails of wild horses. Not one horse, multiple horses, going in different directions. For 3 days, they dragged the 17-year-old woman across rough terrain until her body literally disintegrated. The method was specifically chosen to symbolically punish her alleged tyranny. Because, you know, medieval justice means turning a human being into a medieval piñata. Brunhilde went from being one of the most powerful women in Europe to, well, let's just say, there wasn't enough left for a proper funeral. But sometimes death comes a bit more unexpectedly. Meet Empress Elizabeth of Austria, known as Sisi, who was basically the 19th century's first influencer, obsessed with her 16-inch waist thanks to constantly wearing corsets that were basically torture devices, floor-length hair, and chronic depression. Because as the saying goes, money does not buy happiness. She was also a bit of a rebel. While other empresses were sitting around doing embroidery, Sissy was traveling constantly, learning languages, and writing poetry about how much she hated royal life. Let's just say she was at her peak emo stage. On September 10th, 1898, Sissy was walking to catch a steamboat in Geneva when an Italian anarchist named Luigi Lucchini approached her. Now, Luigi had originally planned to assassinate a different royal, but when that fell through, he decided that Sissy would do just fine. Talk about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Luigi stabbed her in the chest with a sharpened file. Not even a proper weapon, literally just office supplies. And here's where Sissy's fashion obsession became literally deadly. Her corset was so tight that it actually slowed the bleeding. She had no idea how badly she was injured and just kept walking normally. Sissy made it onto the boat, sailed for about 10 minutes, then suddenly collapsed. Only then did people realize she had been stabbed. The thing is, her corset had been acting like a bandage, but once they loosened it to help her breathe, all the blood came rushing out. She died thinking she had just fainted from the heat. Meanwhile, her attacker was caught immediately because he basically just stood there waiting to be arrested. Luigi wanted the publicity more than he wanted to escape, so Sissy died because her fashion choices delayed proper medical treatment. This is what they mean when they say beauty requires sacrifice. But her death didn't really change anything, unlike Princess Charlotte of Wales, whose death changed British history forever. She was supposed to be the future of the British monarchy. She was heir presumptive to the throne, married to Prince Leopold, who later became King of Belgium, and everyone loved her, even her husband, which was rare in royal marriages of the era. In 1817, Charlotte became pregnant, and the entire nation was excited. Finally, heir to secure the succession. What could possibly go wrong? Everything. Literally everything could go wrong. Charlotte went into labor and stayed in labor for 50 hours. 50 hours! That's longer than most people's work weeks. Meanwhile, her doctors were basically just standing around like, yeah, it seems fine. The baby was stillborn, which was devastating enough, but Charlotte initially seemed to be recovering, and everyone thought, well, this is tragic, but at least Charlotte's okay. 5 hours later, Charlotte died from postpartum hemorrhage and sepsis. Because again, being royal doesn't mean good healthcare. Her death shocked the entire nation and changed British history forever. Without an heir, her uncles all scrambled to get married and produce legitimate children. One of those children was Victoria, who became one of Britain's longest reigning monarchs. Charlotte's death accidentally led to the Victorian era. That's how butterfly effect in history works. Continuing this parade of terrible healthcare, Margaret of Austria was a political powerhouse who served as a regent of the Netherlands and raised the future Holy Roman Emperor. She was smart, capable, and successfully navigated the complex world of 16th century European politics. Unfortunately, she also had terrible luck with doctors. In 1530, Margaret stepped on broken glass. Now, in 2025, you would probably clean the wound, get a tetanus shot, maybe some antibiotics, and call it a day. But in 1530 it wasn't that easy. The wound got infected. The infection turned into gangrene, which is exactly as pleasant as it sounds. Margaret's doctors looked at her gangrenous foot and decided surgery was the answer. But first, they needed to manage her pain, so they gave her opium. Lots of opium. Too much opium. The surgery never happened because Margaret died from an opium overdose before they could operate. How did she die, you say? Well, she stepped on glass. Oh, infection. No, it's actually drug overdose. Wait, what? It's complicated. Margaret literally died from the painkillers meant to help her survive surgery for an injury that probably could have been treated with basic wound care. I'm starting to think I should have called this video "Stupid Ancient Doctors Doing Stupid Things." But let's talk about a death with a bit more flair. Finally, we reach Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who spent 45 years on the throne. She was famous for her white makeup look and didn't need no fancy Instagram filters for this. Instead, she painted her face with a mixture that contained lead and mercury. Because remember, beauty requires sacrifice. For decades, Elizabeth slathered her face with what was essentially poison. It gave her that porcelain doll look everyone wanted, but it was also slowly killing her. Oh, and Elizabeth also had terrible teeth, which wasn't unusual for the time, but hers were especially bad. Her teeth were black, rotten, and constantly infected. By 1603, Elizabeth was 69. And suffering from septicemia from her infected teeth, bronchial pneumonia, and decades of lead and mercury poisoning. So well, of course she died. Her courtiers prepared her body for the elaborate funeral feast for England's greatest monarch. But here's where things get really gross. Elizabeth's corpse literally exploded during funeral preparations. Decades of toxin buildup caused her body to decompose so violently that they needed a second coffin. Imagine being the funeral director trying to explain that one. Well, Your Majesty was so toxic that... Actually, she was literally toxic. We're going to need another coffin, and maybe some hazmat use. Elizabeth went from being Gloriana, the greatest queen in England history, to a hazardous waste situation. All because Renaissance beauty standards included enough poison to kill a small army. And if you enjoyed this video, check out this video next with the most painful king deaths in history.